Welcome everyone to another episode of the 40 Acres podcast. I'm Justin Gooseman with Joseph Duffy and Robert Gonsolin. It's a huge week yet again. Feels like the last 4 or 5 episodes. It's all been a huge week for Texas. This week is no different. Texas going to take on Clemson in just a few days, this Saturday in a huge matchup in DKR, arguably the biggest home game that Texas has had in a decade, a decade plus. So we're going to get all into that. We're also going to talk about the entire playoff field, talk about our thoughts on some of those games. Obviously, Notre Dame and Indiana playing on Friday, and all the other games taking place on Saturday. It's going to be a great week of football, a lot of NFL coming up as well. So we're excited to talk about it. But first things first, let's talk about our favorite non-Texas playoff matchup. Do either of you guys have a matchup that you're really excited to see outside of Texas Clemson?
I'm excited to see Kurt Signetti and the Indiana Hoosiers traveling to South Bend to face the Notre Dame Fighting Irish with Marcus Freeman, Riley Leonard. What a game that's going to be, an in-state matchup between two teams that some say are fans of the same team. Some say that Hoosiers are really just Notre Dame fans, but that's another joke for another day, I guess. But I guess that's it's a fun matchup to see because Indiana's not used to having a great football program, and you have this magical year with Curt Cignetti at the helm, his first year with the program, coming from James Madison, having those great seasons, building that program up after being a D2 head coach, taking a chance on himself, and he's got this team really humming. Only had that one, low spot with the Ohio State game and the shoe, but with this matchup here, it's any man's ball game. I don't think Notre Dame should be considered to be a runaway favorite for this game. I think Curcignetti's team will be ready, even on the road, and it's a big in-state matchup. I don't think I've really ever seen this matchup. I don't know if it's happened many times. I haven't done too much research on it in the past, but it should be a fun matchup to watch just for the sake of it'll be the first college football playoff matchup that we'll see in the 12-team era, and we'll see how it looks from there. If this game ends up being elite on a Friday night, I think we're gonna have a lot to look forward to in the entire weekend.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Tennessee traveling to Columbus, Ohio to take on Ohio State. This matchup really strikes me as a battle of the big dogs of the SEC and the big dogs of the Big Ten going at it right now, proving for conference rights, who's really better. You're not really just going for that, but you're also with it, obviously going for an advancement to the next round in the playoffs. But you know, Josh Heupel and his Volunteers heading into Columbus, Ohio, at what's supposed to be about 16 degrees. That's the low, I think it's going to be there, low temperature that's going to be in place on Saturday night. And you have an SEC team down south going all the way and walking into the shoe in that type of weather. You wonder, will Nico Iamaleava be affected by that? Or is weather even going to be playing a factor at all? And is Tennessee just going to play normally how they usually play at a top tier level? Meanwhile, you have Ryan Day and his Buckeyes just missing the Big Ten championship and losing for the fourth year in a row to the Michigan Wolverines. People are like, well, does Ryan Day have to win this game and win the playoffs outright in order to keep his job after all the success and the huge record that he's pulled together for this Buckeye team at the past 5 or 6 seasons? After all that, and people are still like, man, I think Ryan Day's on the hot seat. So I think the Buckeyes and Coach Day are going to come into this matchup against Tennessee, arguably the closest matchup on paper that we're seeing in this first round of the playoffs. I think they're going to come in to this game and basically with a sense of anger, a sense of disdain for being mocked at by fans, especially if you're Ryan Day, being mocked at by the whole fan base of the Scarlet and Gray, basically saying, what happened at Michigan, that happened, but that's a little bit of a chip on our shoulder. We're going to use that in today's game against the Volunteers. So I think it's a sense of Tennessee coming to show some pride for the SEC and prove that they're officially back in college football after a few up and down seasons. And then the Buckeyes trying to prove that, Ryan Day is our coach and we have a little chip on our shoulder from losing to Michigan.
Yeah, I think I would also have to go with that matchup, Robert. And you talked about it. What is the fan base of the Buckeyes going to react with if Ryan Day goes out there and lays an egg in the first quarter? You go down 7-0, maybe your offense doesn't get going. And Kirk Herbstreit talked about this on the selection show, I believe, when that happens, and I think inevitably that will happen at some point in the game. There's going to be a couple offensive drives that Ohio State just does not move the ball against this Tennessee front. And when that happens, are the Buckeye fans going to boo him in a playoff game, in a must-win playoff game? I think that's a very realistic I think that's very realistic. And if that happens, it's going to be really, really tough to try and galvanize your team and bring them together to try and beat a really, really good Tennessee team. And I also think Josh Heupel's the better coach. I know that they've struggled to get into the playoffs in a loaded SEC, but they have played some insane schedules over the last few years, had some really quality wins, and just haven't been able to get in because you run into a gauntlet of a schedule playing Georgia or playing in Alabama, and you can't get over that hump and go nearly undefeated and get into the SEC championship. So I think. I think Josh Heupel's going to outcoach Ryan Day, and I think if and when that does happen, it's going to be really tough for Ryan Day to try and pull his guys together because I think the fans have already turned on him, and that's going to be really, really interesting to watch. From the other side, though, Nico Iamaleava, freshman quarterback, getting a chance in on the biggest stage to really prove himself. I thought he played a fantastic game against Vanderbilt. I thought he's looked really, really strong towards the end of the season. Um, and if they can go in there and get one win, even if that's as far as Tennessee goes, they make it to the quarterfinals and they don't do anything after that. I think that's really positive development for Nico, and they're going to be really good for a long time. So those are the two things I'm really looking forward to watching in that game. But I will say about your game, Joe, that Indiana Notre Dame game is going to be fun. It's the only game being played on Friday, and everyone's going to be tuned in. Notre Dame, in my opinion, shouldn't have been ranked as highly as they were. I know they were only a one-loss team, but you go and lose to Northern Illinois, and you're granted a, a top seed like that. In my opinion, they should have been ranked lower. I don't think that they should have hosted a playoff game. Indiana's one loss was to Ohio State. So I don't know what we're doing there. I know the schedules don't really compare, but at the same time, you go and lose to an unranked team at home. I don't think you should be deserving of the seven seed. Regardless, that's going to be a fun game in South Bend. I think there's going to be a lot of red in that stadium, but I do think the Notre Dame fans are always going to show out. So looking forward to that game as well. Do we have predictions for these first round matchups overall?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are underestimating Indiana and are just downplaying the fact that they're going to be playing on the road on a Friday night. But I think that they forget that this is still an in-state matchup for the Hoosiers. I think they will travel well, like you said, Goose. And Notre Dame, I've heard that they're the best team in all these years dating back to 2012 when they went during the Manti Te'o days. I have heard multiple times that people think this specific Notre Dame team is one of the best that they've seen in that time span. However, we saw Indiana play against Ohio State. Ohio State kind of ran with it at the end, ran away with it at the end, made people doubt how really good Indiana is. But I do think based on their resume this past season, they should be good enough to hang with a Notre Dame type team. And I have Indiana taking this game in an upset and winning it, advancing to the second round to take on Georgia in the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll go with Indiana winning this game as well. I don't really trust Notre Dame. I will say Notre Dame had a very cool story come out a few days ago. I think it might have been yesterday actually with Riley Leonard, their quarterback, and how he was feeling so despondent after they lost to Northern Illinois, and he was so humiliated. He asked for a ride home from an officer, bro, who was in like the back corner, not a friend, not another teammate, a ride home from an officer because he was just so he wanted to be so shielded and away from all of the fans and just take a ride home from this guy over here in the corner. And he thought it was all a nightmare. He thought he could just fall asleep easily. He couldn't fall asleep. He gets up in the morning, rushes to Marcus Freeman's office, trying to apologize and say it's all his fault. But Freeman was all calm, cool, and collected, saying, you know what, this all makes sense in the end, saying, you know, you'll understand and you'll be thankful for this loss, essentially. So I thought that's a pretty cool story they came out yesterday with Riley Leonard. And I think this team, it'll be a great game back and forth. I don't think it'll be a blowout for either team, but I do think Indiana will run away with this. Not run away, I should say, but at least come away within the last 2 minutes. And I think that it'll be the story between a solid defensive effort in the final 5 minutes with the Hoosiers, and I think they can shut down and quiet this Fighting Irish crowd in the final quarter as well. So I do think that Indiana could take care of business here. Slept on for some reason with one loss coming with the Ohio State team, but I do think they can take care of business here.
I'm
I
gonna
say 35-31
I'm gonna
Hoosiers.
differ a little bit, only because Notre Dame has the home field advantage, and South Bend is incredibly tough to play. Again, I do think Indiana's fan base will travel, especially given one of the talking points this week has been ticket prices, and most of these stadiums are not super high because a lot of students are out of town, a lot of people are out of town with family. Um, so I think this game is going to be incredibly close, but I do think Notre Dame is going to squeak it out. I'm confident that Riley Leonard's going to play pretty well. Marcus Freeman's going to have a decent game plan, but like you said, they're a tough team to trust because when have they ever performed well when it matters most in the past? Not totally sure. Just kind of have a hunch that Notre Dame's going to take this one on their home field. I'm going to go 38-30. I think it's again going to be a close game all the way through. I just don't think Indiana is going to be able to hold on towards the end. So I'm going to go with Notre Dame in that one. What about the other matchup we talked about, Tennessee, Ohio State? What do you guys think is going to play out in that game? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think first things first, I know the weather affecting great teams hasn't really been a thing that we can recall in recent memory. I think Tennessee will go into this matchup playing well, but I do think the weather with it's just so extreme in this environment that we're going to see Saturday night. I think, like I said, the low is about 16 degrees. I think the weather is going to affect them a little bit. And I do think Ohio State already is the better team. I know that they're coming off of a loss against Michigan and people may be booing their head coach, which I get. I understand the booing, but that's not the right way to open up a playoff game. That's if you're booing your head coach to open up a game at that level, you're not really instilling confidence in your team as you're about to go play. But besides that, I do think Ohio State, they have the weapons on their offense. They have a great quarterback in Will Howard, and I think they're pretty angry about the loss against Michigan and what's happened from that and the feedback that they got from that. I think that they're in the perfect environment to respond here against Tennessee. And I think the weather is also going to prove too much for them. I have the Buckeyes winning this one in somewhat of a close matchup. Give me 28-25.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Ryan Day and the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Buckeyes fan base, you probably got one of the most difficult draws in the college football playoff first round. And that's not necessarily a knock on Ohio State. It's just Tennessee's actually kind of underrated and was in a tough conference in the Southeastern Conference. Josh Heupel, like Goose was saying, is a great coach. I think he is the better coach out of the two. And I think that with this Tennessee defense, albeit they haven't been as great as they were in the first, opening matchups in the SEC, they still are a very solid defense. I think this will be a defensive matchup in the horseshoe, but it's hard for me to think that the Buckeyes will lay an egg really in um, these final few games of their season like this. Ohio State and Will Howard, their offense is kind of a sleeping giant, in my opinion. We saw a little bit of that with Indiana and the Hoosiers in that ball game a few weeks ago. And Indiana's defense is not necessarily bad or anything, but when they can get going, it takes a few plays. But when they get going, build them upon one another. This is a really good offense, and it's hard for me to believe that they're going to lose the next two games, or back-to-back games, I should say, in the horseshoe, especially after getting humiliated against their rival. So I don't know how Tennessee is going to fare. I hear there's going to be a good amount of fans for the Tennessee Volunteers traveling up there as well, but I don't know if it'll matter too much in that historic venue. So I'm going to go with the Ohio State Buckeyes winning a defensive battle 23 to 21.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be a pretty defensive matchup. Robert, you brought up the cold. I think that's the biggest concern for Tennessee and their fans right now. Video came out, I think it was yesterday or the day before, of them still practicing indoors in a heated facility. I think that's the wrong move. I think you got to get out there and you got to practice outside. You got to get your guys used to it. You got to get used to hitting some guys in that cold weather. Um, because man, it is different. And we see it even in the NFL. A team like the Miami Dolphins can just fails to win in cold weather. And you can attribute that to whatever you want. But at the same time, I do think that's a valid concern. Um, at the same time, I think the sky is falling in Ohio State right now. I think Ryan Day is on his last stand. And like I said earlier, I think their offense will inevitably stall out two or three possessions in a row. And I think the fan base will completely turn on him. And I don't think that there's anything that he can do to try and bring his team together after that. Um, I really like the Tennessee matchup here. I do think Ohio State has some better skill position guys, but at the same time, I just it's really tough for me to give this win to Ohio State when they laid that egg versus Michigan. Like that was such a bad performance, and I don't know if they're going to be ready enough for another big time matchup in the shoe. So for that reason, I'm going to go with excuse me, with Tennessee in this game. I'm going to go 24 to 16. Um, Again, I just think a defensive matchup when Ohio State has failed to really get the offense going against some really solid defensive teams this season. I think it's going to be no different versus Tennessee. Tennessee is going to have a few more explosive plays. I don't trust Will Howard. I would say I trust Nico more than I trust Will Howard at this point, and I know Howard's the more experienced QB, but yeah, I got to go with the Vols here. Last non-Texas matchup. The matchup really nobody's been talking about. I feel like nobody really wants to talk about SMU versus Penn State. And I don't blame them, but I think it's still going to be a fun game.
Should be fun. I don't think it's a bad game.
Penn State, SMU, what are our guys' thoughts?
You know, if Robert, you want to take this first, no problem.
Yes. So Kyron Jennings is the SMU quarterback's name, right? Didn't want to couldn't remember if it was
SOC's finest, South Oak Cliff,
right.
DFW.
Texas native playing for SMU, DFW, like you said, Joe, in the DFW. He showed a lot of talent, especially in the ACC championship game with that comeback against Clemson, and they almost won the game. Clemson won on a very, very impressive field goal. But I think people kind of doubt them in that they come from the American, they come from, I'm sorry, they come from the ACC, and people doubt them because they're still kind of viewed as a group of five team. I mean, it's their first year in a Power Four conference, so I think that they get doubted a lot. And then to add on to that, people know Penn State as a top tier Power Four team. You know, going 10-2 almost every season. Drew Alar is a great quarterback. He almost beat Ohio State this year. And I think when you put the two teams together on paper, it looks like it's going to be a pretty lopsided matchup. But knowing that Penn State is vulnerable when they lost to Ohio State and Oregon, yes, they're two of the best teams in the country, but they are vulnerable. They can lose games. We've seen them lose the big game to Ohio State. We've seen them kind of lose the big game against Oregon. I know that they didn't choke that game, but they kind of let the Ohio State game fall through their hands. So here you are in Happy Valley. You have another big game with an ACC team, an SMU team that was that people are finally starting to realize, okay, we actually see how talented Jennings is because of what we saw on display at the ACC championship game. I think people are starting to realize how good of a quarterback and how talented, how legit this SMU team really is. And so I think SMU definitely has the potential to win this game. I don't think it's going to be as lopsided or as big of a blowout that people think it is. I think SMU will be in this game all four quarters. I do think Penn State will win because they don't really win the big game too much. And think with the stakes like this, you know, people say the 12 team playoffs perfect for Penn State. All they gotta do is go 10-2 and they're in. And surely that's what happened this year. I think that they're not going to blow this first playoff game that they've ever been in, especially when people have said, you know, the 12 team playoff is perfect for them. And on top of that, I think they know how to win the big game now because they've lost it so many times. But I think it will be close, and Penn State's going to start to pull away with about 5.5 minutes left in the game. Give me Penn State with this one. I'm going to go 24-17.
Yeah, SMU. I mean, it's so weird for me, even to this day. I'm kind of in your boat that you're talking about, Robert. That people still view this team as a group of five team. It's just weird for me seeing Southern Methodist University playing ACC ball. So with that, it's hard for me to escape a group of five team like that's in the American Conference or in the previous conferences in the past. Now playing a big time game in the college football playoff, contending for a national championship. But I mean, they've earned it, and Rhett Lashley earned the ACC Coach of the Year. Pretty much ran away with it. Not much comp, I guess you could say, but him and just Dabo Swinney. But this offense is still very good, but the defense is just as good, and they're a very well-rounded, balanced team. They give up 20.8 points a game. They've had over 40 plus sacks, and you don't hear that too much about the SMU defense. You hear so much about Kevin Jennings, the quarterback from SOC, and not necessarily the defense that is, just as good. It makes this team very balanced, and they were right there about to win the American Conference, excuse me, the ACC in their first year in the conference that they were leading pretty much the entire season. And then, Clemson did what Clemson does. And they're always a resilient team in that fashion. But SMU, I think, is going to come out hungry. They're going to come out with some fire. But I don't think it's enough in Beaver Stadium. This is the biggest stadium I believe they played in all season. Of course, the Ohio State Penn State game was the highest a reported sellout of the year, 111,000, I believe. And, we know how big that stadium is, how big of an atmosphere and advantage it is for James Franklin and the Penn State Nittany Lions. I think that that'll be enough to carry this team. But something to watch will be Drew Aller's backup. I don't know if y'all saw this, Bo Pribula, who called an impossible decision, he said, quote, to end the transfer portal. And so their normal backup that they have behind Aller won't be there for the game. And so it'll be a freshman who'll be backing up Aller. So if Drew Aller unfortunately gets hurt, not saying I'm hoping that, but if he were to get banged up or something, There's no Bo Pribula behind him, or at least a backup who's had playing experience behind him. It'll have to be a freshman who is an Ethan Grunkemeyer I'm seeing right here, who would have to come in for the Nittany Lions. So that's something to watch for sure. It's just the reality of the transfer portal today in 2024. I got the Nittany Lions 25-20.
Yeah, I just want to Goose before you go. I just want to kind of say or just give my 2 cents on maybe some transfer portal rules here. I don't know. Maybe I need to brush up on the NCAA calendar and what events or what's going on in February through March. But it is weird to me that, you can enter the transfer portal while your team is still playing and just leave the team. Or it's weird that we saw incoming freshman Julian Sayin last year, early enrollee, decommit from Alabama while decommit from Alabama. Or no. Before he decommitted from Alabama, we saw him kind of practicing with them for the Rose Bowl. Did we not see that? I feel like that the transfer portal for everyone, whether you make a bowl game or not, should open up right when the national championship ends. And then it should they should shift the closing date back however many days needed, however many weeks needed, but that's when it should open up. That way, players will coaches won't have to make adjustments to their roster when they're going to the playoffs or they're going to go play in a bowl game that they want to win. Players will have to play for their team. Um, Players have to play for their team, honestly. I mean, that's what's needed. It's what's needed. And I think just the transfer portal being shifted back until the end of the national championship, that would be necessary for college football. And it would help teams bring their A game to the bowls and bring their A game to the playoffs. And I think that's what we need to see more. Also, Joe, real quick, you're a DFW guy. People were never really expecting SMU to make it to the playoffs this year, their first year in a Power Four conference. Yet they're here and they're going to play Happy Valley up in Penn State. As a DFW guy, how does SMU travel for this game? Their fans, are they going to travel well for this?
They've never really traveled well, man. It's an elite institution. I mean, all due respect to SMU, but their fan base is not necessarily like ginormous. But going to Happy Valley, if they show up like that, it's gonna be very minuscule compared to the amount of white that you will see in the crowd. Obviously, that's a huge stadium, like I was talking about. I don't know if SMU is gonna show up like that. I would be stunned if they even filled an eighth of that stadium. They don't travel like that, not necessarily. They've been known for that for a long time, but as far as a football program, they've always been known as like a sleeping giant a little bit because they have recruits right there in the city of Dallas, plenty of talent in DFW alone. They just needed the coach to rally them up. And so when the TCU coach kind of left, that was a big blow to that team that was trying to work its way back up as he went to a rival in TCU in Fort Worth. But if they've never really traveled well like that as a fan base, I don't know what to expect, but I don't think it'll be that many in Penn State.
Yeah, I think y'all both think this game's going to be a close game. I don't think it's going to be close. I think Penn State's going to win like 30-13. I think it might be close in the first half, but dude, that Penn State D line it's really tough to try and get any push off the line of scrimmage and protect your quarterback. We saw that whenever Penn State played Ohio State, and Penn State's offense is one of the weirder offenses in college football. They bring their tight end in to play quarterback sometimes. He was a quarterback in high school, and they run a little bit of the wing T, the super strong formations. And I don't think James Franklin is the greatest coach in the world. I think he's struggled with a lot of the things that other coaches, frankly, in this field of 12 playoff teams have struggled with, and that's winning the big game. At the same time, I really don't think SMU is going to come in and just like shock the world. Um, I do think Penn State is just the better team, and I don't think this stage is quite big enough for that to meet the James Franklin too big. The lights are too bright, you know. So I got to go with Penn State. I'm going to go 30-13. I think they're going to kind of run all over them. I think Aller's going to play really well. And y'all both talked about the transfer portal, and I'll say this: Malik Murphy had to do the same thing last year before Texas played in the Sugar Bowl, I believe. He had to enter the transfer portal, and that was a big storyline because Quinn Ewers had been banged up for he's been banged up every season that he's played as a starter. He's missed a couple games, so if he had gone down, Texas would have had to go to a third string quarterback. And I do think that's wrong. I think the transfer portal should open up later, or the other solution is you allow the transfer portal to open up, but guys can't commit until after the national championship. Um, that way, if you want to put your name in the portal, you want to make sure coaches know you're in the portal, especially for teams that aren't in the playoff. You can go ahead and do that. But for teams that are in the playoff, you stay practicing with your team. Nobody can sign anyone. And then once the national championship ends, it's a free for all. I think those are the two best solutions. I think Robert, yours is probably the best overall, just because I don't think the NCAA is going to be able to stop tampering if they do allow guys to enter the portal without signing anywhere. So, that's what I'll say on that. But let's talk some Texas football because this is what we're all here to talk about. This matchup scares me. I'm just going to be honest, it does. Like I said last week, I think Cade Klubnik right now is playing the best football of his career, and he reminds me sort of like what Baker Mayfield does for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Um, very mobile, able to create with his legs, and has a really strong arm. Obviously, we talked about the Quinn Ewers storyline last week. Uh, but this Clemson offense it's talented. And then you go look at their running back, and it's kind of a running back by committee. I mean, they got Brashard, excuse me, they got Brashard Smith averaging 6 yards per carry, 14 touchdowns on the season, and then as a receiving back, 35 receptions, 300 yards, four touchdowns out of the backfield. You know, they got wide receiver by committee. Roderick Daniels, Keyshawn Smith, both over 500 yards on the season. Jordan Hudson, 380 yards on the season, all over 30 catches on the year. And they get the tight ends involved as well too. RJ Maryland, Matthew Hibner, both 24, 22 receptions on the season. And that's something that has, you know, created some mismatch issues for Texas. The game against Georgia, Lawson Lucky and their tight end by committee approach really worked for them. So I think this is a tough matchup for Texas. I don't think this is a game where you walk into DKR feeling like you're going to run away with it by three or four scores. I just don't think that's a reality, especially when you look at the other side and they have Dabo Swinney as their head coach.
Well, hopefully that's a good sign for the Texas fan base so the students can actually stay for 4 quarters, so they can actually watch a good game, I guess. But, Cade Klubnik after last season, I really thought he was cooked. I thought he was down and out. I thought he was his prospect as, one of the next great quarterbacks in college football was over because he just couldn't really figure out the game. And the reality was he was just young in the system. And he's really grown in this Garrett Riley offense, and he has already 19 more touchdowns than he did at this time last year. He has 33 passing touchdowns, I believe. Um, is still having a great passing efficiency. Lowered his picks as well. He has 5 picks right now on the season. I don't know why Texas is an 11.5, 12-point favorite in this game. Listen, I know Texas has really dominated everybody except Georgia. I get it. But those are some pretty significant losses. And what those losses have shown is that it's really just on the offense, Quinn Ewers and the offense, not moving the ball efficiently, not great in the red zone efficiently as well. But with Clemson, I mean, the only losses they've had really besides that one ACC loss have just been non-conference losses. And of course, one of them came to the Georgia Bulldogs, who stopped them in the beginning of the season. And so I thought really we're going to get a different Clemson Tigers team after seeing that loss, but Georgia just ended up being the SEC champion that we knew from this game. So I think that even with the Texas defense, they're gonna have a little bit of trouble themselves in this game. He's probably gonna be the most athletic quarterback they played all season long, Cade Klubnik. He's physical. He's also a great runner for his size. He is also very elusive when carrying the ball, and he's very underrated. And I think a lot of Texas fans who are not in tune with ACC ball might be a little shocked on what's coming to Austin. He's not new to the area, of course. He's a Westlake product. They pump out talent like hotcakes. And Kay Klubnik, who's also faced Quinn Ewers in the past in high school football playoffs, with also Michael Taft on his team as well. This should be a great game. I anticipate that it'll be very close all four quarters, but I do think Texas will eventually pull away with it with the home crowd in their ears, in Clemson's ears, that is. And Texas can win this game, I say 28-23.
Yeah. If I asked y'all when the last time Texas played an ACC team, would y'all know when that was? 2002 against
How has
North
it been that
Carolina.
long, man?
They played Cal. Cal's in the ACC, but that was when they were in the Pac-12.
Oh,
They
yeah.
played Notre Dame, but Notre Dame's not in the ACC as a football team. They're in the ACC as a basketball team, as we all know. So
Hmm.
2002, last time Texas played an ACC team against, and it was against North Carolina, which I believe they won that game. But with that being said, the ACC is a very good brand of football that Texas has not really seen in over 2 decades. And Joe, you said, Texas is favored in this matchup. I don't know why they're favored either. Not that we shouldn't be favored, maybe. I don't know why we're favored by that much. And this game, look, as we all know, this game is going to be close with about 11 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. This will be a close game. Texas is going to make a few mistakes as they always do, and their defense is going to play well. It's going to be a mix of that, and that's why Clemson will be in this game. I think Cade Klubnik's a great quarterback. I mean, we saw the Ewers Klubnik duel in high school, like you said, Joe. And I know that Westlake and Klubnik won by a lot, but that game was a 7-7, 14-14, 21-21 game to start. And I think it's just this is college now, all sorts of different players from all around the country playing in this game. So this is not Southlake versus Westlake part two, but this this will be a matchup where it could be very close. And when Texas defense comes up with the stop or the three and out, Quinn Ewers and his team are going to have to find a way to go downfield and score, especially in the third quarter. If they're winning by about 10 at halftime, that's not going to be enough because since the beginning of the Vanderbilt game, after they lost to Georgia the first time around, Texas has only scored one touchdown in all third quarters, and that was against Florida. Every other third quarter, I think it's either they scored 0 points or they've kicked one field goal. But there's only been one touchdown in the third quarter since the Vanderbilt game, and that was against Florida. So, so with that being said, I think that Texas certainly has the chance to win this game. I think that they will. I think that the defense will prove better than Klubnik's passing, even though Klubnik is playing at the top of his game right now. But what needs to happen and what they didn't do against Georgia 2 weeks ago is they need to score in the third quarter in order to win this game and not make it close like they do every other game.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Robert. And I'm gonna say this too. I think this is the game Quinn Ewers has to prove himself, or Steve Sarkisian has to be ready to put in Arch Manning. Because at this point you've reached the playoffs, and I think one of the reasons Arch hasn't come in as much during the regular season is you don't want that divide in the locker room. You don't want Quinn to want to step away from the team, whatever. But you're in the playoffs now, and every game is win or go home. And if Ewers struggles against this Clemson defense, which is talented, don't get me wrong, but they let you score points. They will let you put up points. And if Ewers can't do that, and this offense can't do that, then I think you have to go with the more dynamic quarterback. It's weird. I was talking to my dad yesterday. I'm a Falcons fan, right? And it feels like these two teams are like kind of similar at the quarterback position. You got a statue in the pocket with Quinn or Kirk Cousins for the Falcons, with a guy who can really move around in the backfield on the bench, a guy who can launch the ball down the field and put it into tight windows on the bench. And it feels like this is the game that Quinn has to silence everyone, or Steve Sarkisian has to be ready to put in Arch Manning. And I don't mean that Quinn can go out there and throw for 200 yards and just kind of manage the game. No, I think this is a prove it game for Quinn Ewers. He needs 250 plus yards, three touchdowns to really silence the doubters and go into the rest of the playoffs with confidence. And so I'll say that again, Sark has to be ready to throw in the backup quarterback because Arch has been very dynamic when he does come in. I think, again, we will see more of him. Sark's been very willing to talk about that in media availabilities, on CFP shows, in the press conferences with local media. He said that he needs to use Arch more, so I think we are going to see more of him regardless. But I do think this is going to be an extremely close game. Texas has not won a big game at home since I think we were talking before the recording. Robert, Kansas State last year was their biggest win at home in the Steve Sarkisian era. And so you look at that, and we've talked about other coaches in this field not having a big win, especially at home. Steve Sarkisian doesn't have that big win. So I'm going to have to say that this game is going to be extremely close. I think there are going to be multiple points in the game that are very pivotal, a couple fourth down conversions that can swing momentum on either side. But I do think, once again, the Texas defense, it's just too strong for me to lose faith in them performing on the biggest stage. And so I do think Texas wins. I'll say 27 to 21. Um, I think it's going to be a defensive stand on the last drive. I don't think that's a comfortable defensive stand, but a defensive stand nonetheless. So that's how I think the game is going to play out. But do y'all have any other major talking points for this game that you really wanted to touch on?
Yeah, the whole Quinn Ewers debate about is it, is Arch going to play a little bit? And I agree with you, Goose, when you say this is Quinn Ewers' game, that he needs to prove himself. Now, my question to y'all is the debate is out there. Does he do that? Does he prove himself this game? Does he succeed in doing that this game?
I hope, I hope if there is a game for him to look better in, look again, Quinn Ewers, I do think he was um at fault with some of the throws he was going towards the end zone with, and maybe some of his pocket presence. But I thought overall he played pretty good in the game. He did much better than I anticipated against the Bulldogs than the first time he played them in Austin. He played much better in the SEC championship against them. I think that Steve Sarkisian has to find a way to work again to the middle of the field, which for some reason he was missing when trying to punch the ball in from, say, plus territory, trying to drive it down the field against Georgia to punch in a touchdown, which they only did one time. I don't understand why we didn't see more middle of the field action. And with that, I think they can try to build with more play calling that's geared towards Quinn Ewers' strengths and not trying to go deep on the sidelines in the pylons, which is not his best throws, and not trying to send Gunnar Helm on the wheel route towards, the end zone as well. But looking towards the underneath routes and the crossers and the drags, that's what Quinn feasts on, especially on the run every now and then. But Clemson's defense, they're a pretty solid defense, and not as good as Georgia's, in my opinion. But I do think this is a great game for Quinn to build on. And I think they should look at building more towards the middle of the field like they've done in games past. Because if they can do that and play a solid third quarter, I think this is Texas's game to lose.
100% agree. It's been so weird to watch the offense completely ignore the middle of the field. And I think part of that has to do with the kind of feathery ball that Quinn throws. He likes to put a lot of touch on it. And it's strange because he doesn't zip the ball over the middle like some of these great quarterbacks. He has the arm talent too. He has the strength and the footwork too. But he hasn't done that a whole lot as of late. And I don't think the play calling has helped improve that either, like you said. A lot of play calls going to the boundaries, going to corners of the end zone instead of trying to attack the middle of the field. So we'll see what Texas can do about that, but it's going to be a fun one. It's going to be a great game in DKR. Joe, I know you'll be there. Robert, are you going to be there as well?
I'll be there. I'll be there for just a little bit, as I've actually gotta leave the game early for an event I have back here in Houston. But I wanted to show my support for the first half.
Dang, that's tough. But nonetheless, y'all got to let me know what that environment's like. I'll be watching on the TV. I'll be ready. Don't worry. I'm excited to see that environment from the big screen. Um, Last but not least, we got to give our Sicko Bowl game picks. Every week we got to do it. So what are y'all looking forward to this week outside of the college football playoff?
This week in particular, I'm
Just
pulling up
in
my
general.
schedule.
Just random bowl game in general.
Yeah. All right. As I'm looking, we have a I don't know if we're gonna be doing an episode on next Friday, the 27th, or if we'll be doing it in, I don't know if an episode's going to get published that day, but ooh, I like, I really like Syracuse against Washington State. Give me, give me the orange. But Joe, I'll let you go next. But then I have a second bowl I'd like to say, or after y'all two. If y'all don't say it, I'd like to talk about it for just 10.
I mean, last week I said Florida versus Tulane. I'm still not seeing much DJ Lagway updates, so I'm guessing he's playing. I'm guessing he's playing. I still want to see that. But for the sake of a new answer this week, I guess I'll go with not too many enticing matchups here. I guess that's why it's a sicko matchup. I guess Navy and Oklahoma. That'll be a fun one. See, I thought we were this close to seeing Oklahoma in the Frisco Bowl, and I would have pulled up for that. But it ended up being West Virginia and Memphis, which ended up being a high scoring affair, a great game for the city of Frisco. I would have pulled up just to be a hater to watch Oklahoma lose in person if possible, but that didn't happen. But Navy and Oklahoma going to face off in Amon G. Carter Stadium, the Armed Forces Bowl. Neither team, well, Oklahoma's not necessarily that good, but Navy has had a great season, just coming off of a great rivalry win against the Army. They got to sing Navy Blue and Gold second, and they're facing off in the TCU Stadium for the Armed Forces Bowl, which is held pretty much every year for the past 2 decades, I believe now. So that should be a good game. Of course, neither team is ranked at this point, but I like this game just for Navy going against a blue blood program that's not had the year that they have envisioned in their first year in the SEC compared to their rival Texas. I like that game for a Sicko Bowl.
I was actually going to say that same matchup, but I have my eyes on another one. Georgia Tech versus Vanderbilt. I feel like these two teams kind of are the same. I mean, Diego Pavia, Haynes King, they feel like almost the same quarterback. Very mobile, very tough quarterbacks. We've seen them take the best of the SEC down to the wire. Obviously, Georgia Tech beating Miami, beating Florida State. Florida State had a horrible season, but I think that kind of set the tone for their season. Um, Georgia Tech played Georgia in that amazing eight overtime thriller. I'm interested to see how Georgia Tech plays without Eric Singleton. Obviously, they lost him to the portal. So their passing attack is not going to be as strong. But I really, really like both of these squads. Pavia was just granted another year of eligibility. I'm sure he's looking to build on what Vanderbilt did this year with a bowl win. So that's going to be a really fun game, in my opinion. That's the Birmingham Bowl, a week from Friday on the 27th. in Alabama at 3:30 Eastern. I'm really looking forward to that game. And then I'm not trying to steal your thunder, Robert, but I am going to say Coastal Carolina versus UTSA is one that I'm looking forward to as well. The 2-1-0, always got to watch the Roadrunners. And that game's happening on the 23rd in the Myrtle Beach Bowl. So I'll be tuned into that as well. Got to cheer on the San Antonio squad.
No, Goose, you're all good. You brought up the Georgia Tech Vanderbilt game, which is what I was hoping one of y'all would bring up, and I think that's gonna be a super high scoring game. I'm gonna want to watch that. I think in all of bowl season, I think it goes without saying that either Friday the 27th or Saturday the 28th is the best non-CFP day. It could be Saturday because there's just more games and you have Cam Ward and Deion Sanders as Buffalo's playing, but the 27th has some good matchups too.
That Alamo Bowl is going to be electric.
That's gonna be the best Alamo Bowl in years.
Yeah,
Really.
agreed.
Isn't it funny how Texas would go to the Alamo Bowl and people would be like, "Great, the Alamo Bowl again." But here we have this matchup coming up with Deion Sanders and all the starters playing, and everyone's all tuned in for it. It's got
Which
the
should have
prime
been the
time
Big
slot on
12
ABC, I
championship.
think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be a
Which,
fun one.
by the way, Goose, you'll have to tell us how that TNT presentation is for the
Oh
playoff game
yeah.
on Saturday.
TNT football.
That,
You
oh
love to
man.
see it.
Oh man, I'm devastated that I'm not gonna get Kirk and Chris on the call for that one.
At least you're hearing Dave Pash. He's an ESPN commentator.
Yeah,
That's
it's
true. That's
ESPN,
true.
ESPN crew on the call.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah.
Who's with Dave Pash in that one?
Dusty Dvorak.
Okay,
They're the usual pair for college
that's a
football.
solid crew. I'm not
Yeah, I
too.
mean, since TNT has that deal now with kind of ESPN, I guess they just exchange employees like that because, inside of the
Yeah.
NBA is doing like some trade, bro. Like that's how they're allowing these games to come to TNT inside the NBA come to ESPN eventually. So they work like in tandem now. So ESPN commentators going to be doing this game. I was hoping that'd be the case. I was like, I don't know any TNT commentators that do football unless Ernie like hopped on the call or something.
I mean,
Well, I heard
Ernie
that
does some college basketball. I mean, he might be like the pregame guy. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you could be.
every time I've mentioned this game being on TNT, I've heard, like will we hear? I've heard people legitimately ask, will we hear Shaq on the call? And I'm like, I don't think so, because
Thought we were
like
gonna hear Brian
oh,
Anderson. I
football,
would have loved that.
Yeah, that would have been fun, for sure. I think it's going to be interesting. I'm a big score bug guy. I want to see what the TNT score bug's going to look like because they had one for like the regular season, kind of. It wasn't great. I would imagine they have a new one for the playoff. I feel like that's what all the big broadcast companies do is they kind of change it up for the playoff. Um, Interested to see what that's going to look like.
Big scorebook guy as well. Yes, sir.
not a huge fan of. I don't know how different it is from the NBA, but TNT's college basketball score bug.
They had the same one for like a decade, bro. It was
Not a huge
crazy.
fan. I feel like just it looks very generic.
It does,
Yeah, they keep it simple. I kind of respect that. They don't do too much of their score bug.
which is nice. I agree. That is nice.
They keep it a little small, like a little rectangle in the corner. I like it.
Anyway, y'all, that's going to wrap us up here for the 40 Acres Football Podcast. We're going to be tuned into this game, but we'll be back next week. Maybe not on our regularly scheduled time. If Texas wins or loses, though, we will still have a pod going up either Saturday or Sunday, I would imagine. But thanks as always for listening. For Justin Gooseman, Robert Gonsolin, and Joe Duffy, we'll see you next week.